Welcome to Become an Idol. I'm Dr. Robin Sargent, owner of Idol Courses. This is the place where newbies come to learn and veterans share their knowledge. I have here with me today Destery Hildenbrand, and he develops immersive technology for learning. That's probably a terrible way to introduce you, Destery. Will you please do a better job of introducing yourself?
Sure thing. So my name is Destery Hildenbrand, and I work for a company called Intellezy, and I'm an XR solution architect. So essentially what that means is that I help our clients, our customers, and everybody realize their immersive technology dreams. So whether it's working with virtual reality simulations or working with augmented reality interactions that they can do just through their phone, I help develop and ideate and create that sort of blended piece for these organizations to incorporate these newer technologies, these new modalities to deliver training to their learners.
I bet everyone listening to you right now, Destery, is like, what? How do you even get to that type of technology or those types of skills in the learning and development industry? And so I want to go into the Wayback Machine, and I want to know, how did you get started? How did you become an idol? And then tell us from there to all the way to now you are the XR whiz.
So I actually started my career as a graphic designer for the Yellow Pages. You want to talk about the least amount of technology possible, right? It's like that one comedian. He's like, I was on the telephone with Blockbuster Video, right? So it's one of those things. So I used to paginate the Yellow Pages. I was a graphic designer for the Yellow Pages. And then as I was in that space all those years ago, that's when I very first was introduced to the term instructional design and an instructional designer. And all of a sudden I was like, hey, that could be something that I would really like to do in there. I actually became a trainer just because I was the only one that would get up in front of people and talk. Like they would be like, hey, can anybody get in front of this group and talk about this or explain this? And everybody literally took a step back, like in the movies, they took a step back and I just stayed there and they're like, look, he volunteered. So that's essentially how I became a trainer. I've been very fortunate. I did a lot of like drama and speech and, all that kind of stuff. So I was always comfortable talking to groups. And this just was sort of a natural evolution. And from there, I was always really drawn towards the technology. The very first e-learning development tools, I was early on in a Storyline. I became an early adopter of that tool. I was using Captivate way back when. Lectora was the very first one that I cut my teeth on, building content. So I just slowly evolved my career into that. And then about 2013, I was introduced to augmented reality. I really hadn't thought about it much, really hadn't, done a ton with it. And it was literally it was like a coloring page. And when you scanned it, it changed color, like it filled in the colors. And I thought, holy cow, this like instantly made this really cool thing. How could I make this for learning? And from there, I was hooked. Right? I went and found all the information I could. I became as knowledgeable as I could. And then I realized in our space, in learning and development, there wasn't a lot of people talking about it. And I was like, we need to know more about this. Right? So yeah, I took what I knew and then I was like, hey, can I come talk at your thing? Can I come explain this? Can I come show this? And slowly but surely, groups were like, I guess you can show up, right? So, and then once they invited me in, I just never left. So I go to all these things and I try to share and show and learn all at the same time. And from there, I just sort of evolved into how can we incorporate this type of technology, right? When we're talking about augmented reality, it's that overlay of information that you scan. A lot of people think of it like Pokemon Go, right? That's a really great sort of universal way to think about it. But yeah, so I started doing that. And then I was like, hey, I really want to do virtual reality too, because that's really a part of this whole ecosystem too. So then I went back to the drawing board and I had to teach myself how to code. I had to teach myself Unity, right? So I could actually build some of these cool things. And then, of course, as soon as I did that, they came out with tools that made it easier. So I spent
A whole lot easier.
yeah, I spent 5 years learning how to code. And then they're like, oh, by the way, we're going to try to make this as codeless as possible, which is great. But it helped out. But yeah, I just sort of went from there. I spent some time as a full-time virtual reality developer for a couple years. And then I ended up at Intellezy, helping them with their immersive technology strategy. So how can we build this out? How can we create this opportunity for our clients and then in turn for their learners in the end, right? How can we make what we're doing or what they're doing stick more? E-learning's great, videos are great, but where can we put people in these situations? How can we immerse them? What types of experiences make the most sense? And then what types of those experiences can make the learning the most effective?
I want to hear all the stories, Destery. I'm just like got so many that I want to know about. So my first question is, what does Intellezy do?
So Intellezy, we do a little bit of everything, right? So I lead the XR team on our end. So we build either bespoke content. We also custom build virtual reality soft skill training to partner with our existing video library as well. But at its core, Intellezy also has a video library that we resell. There's 10,000 videos, 20 different languages, right? So you can learn about everything from cybersecurity to pivot tables in Excel, right? All of the above inside of there. And then we also have a core team that builds custom learning. We build e-learning videos, blended solutions for our clients as well that incorporate all different types of modalities. A lot of the things that I'm sure your students are learning today that we can, help sort of build out that very robust learning experiences and ecosphere for our clients.
Okay, so we know what Intellezy does. We've heard a little bit. We just scratched the surface of AR and VR. Now, I bet beyond the technology and how do you build things or whatever, what are some of the questions you ask or some of the decision criteria you make as a strategist to decide, okay, this is worth the effort and the cost and the resources of making AR or VR? And I'm sure those are probably two different categories for you. So maybe we start with AR and augmented reality. What makes you say like, oh, this is worth doing it this way?
Yeah. So what we run into when it comes to use cases for these types of technologies, right? They don't always fit for everything. They're not like a magic elixir that's going to cure all the learning ails that our teams have. But what we find is that specifically with augmented reality, anytime we need to have that just-in-time learning, that moment of need that we're looking for, augmented reality, you scan a QR code and it immediately pops up information to you, right? I think the easiest association I can make now is after the pandemic, we all have QR codes for menus now, right? You scan it, it brings up that instant bit of information. The same kind of thing, the same idea behind it is with augmented reality. So when you scan something, it brings up that instant piece of information. It doesn't cause any of our workers to lose any time. They don't have to be off the floor. They don't have to stop building widgets, whatever it is that they're doing, but they can just be like, oh, I know step 1 through 4, step 5 changed, but I know 6 through 10. How do I get the information for 5? We can't always send somebody to go see an e-learning. What instant information can we give them? So you scan it, brings it up. Another great thing that augmented reality does, and it's all through a mobile device typically, right? There's some wearable devices, but typically we see in learning, it's all happening through a mobile device. And one of the things that we see is that you're able to visualize products and process in 3D space where you're at. So imagine if you're trying to sell, a widget, or you're trying to visualize a vehicle that you're talking about, or visualize a process that you're trying to explain. As you explain it and show some 2D pictures, what if you're able to scan and then drop that vehicle right in front of you so you can get up close and see what it looks like? You can see all the different pieces. You can get inside and look around at the dashboard, any of those types of things. And that not only helps out when it comes to things for learning, for our learners to really understand what it is we're trying to teach them, but it also allows us to partner with other groups within the organization too. Things like sales or marketing. How can we all work together. And that's one thing you'll find as well, is that learning doesn't necessarily, the development doesn't happen in a silo, or at least it shouldn't. We should be communicating with as many different groups as possible. And this gives us an opportunity to do that. So those types of use cases for augmented reality are really kind of those home run, kind of use cases. And I think of the two, when we're talking about augmented reality versus virtual reality, augmented reality is going to be, it's going to take less to get it going. With the tools that you have, with the delivery method, a lot of organizations have that BYOD policy now that's relatively robust. So everybody updates their phone every 2 years. So we always are going to have the latest technology and pieces that we need. Now, when it comes to virtual reality, what we run into there is that typically is a full simulation, whether it's in a browser or in your headset. And where virtual reality really shines is that anytime we need to get people hands-on practicing a skill, or we need to put them in potentially dangerous situations to learn something, and VR allows us to do that without putting them in dangerous situations. So imagine an open pit mine, or they're on an oil rig for the first time, or they're working from heights. Anything that you can think of, safety or those types of complex trainings. It also works really well if, let's say, you've got a dozen people that you have to send to a location to train them, right? All the way there. Or they're using materials that they exhaust the materials, right? They're practicing learning fire extinguishers, and they use the fire extinguisher and it's out, right? You have to pay to get more of those. So any of the tools that you use to train them, it works really well in VR as well, because you can recreate them. And then there's just that first cost to build it. And then once you have that, you have this very robust training simulation space. Imagine the holodeck in Star Trek, right? Or that virtual spaces that you see that people can go in and actually try things out. And that's really where VR makes the most sense. Again, it's not for everything, but when it comes to those dangerous situations, anytime that you want to save on money and travel and resources. One last thing I'll throw in too is that we do a lot of soft skill training in virtual reality, where you're actually talking to an avatar using conversational AI in a way that you could practice those leadership skills or emotional intelligence. What's the scariest part about having those soft skill trainings is when they say, all right, partner up and role play. We're all like, I don't do that. Right. So imagine you could do that with a virtual avatar that would have the same responses each time. You could practice, you could fail in that, controlled environment until you're ready to actually go out into the world. So long story short, right? That's sort of the use cases that you think of with augmented and virtual reality.
No, that was crystal clear. I loved all the detail that you gave us, Destery. What do you think about how much is actually being used of the AR and the VR? I see I understand a lot of use cases. I even think about the trades and the frontline workers, even when you were talking about AI and overlaying things, even if you have to go in to fix a water heater, right? If they had just the little sticker, then, I could figure out how to fix it just in time and all those kinds of things. How much do you think this is being adopted?
I think we're seeing more and more that people are realizing, especially with augmented reality, because there's so many tools out there that are sort of that WYSIWYG, right? That what you see is what you get. And it's cloud-based, codeless authoring. So people don't have to learn. They don't have to spend 5 years learning Unity, right? They don't have to spend that time learning these coding languages, because typically the skill set that our industry has doesn't necessarily lean heavy in that direction, right? We're very much in between adult learning theory and working with our graphics. We didn't have time for our coding 101 or C# 101 and things like that. But what I see is that with augmented reality, we're starting to see a lot more of blended uses. It's not a standalone learning option. Same thing with virtual reality. Where it fits best is, let's go through some content. Let's scan and have an augmented assessment, or let's have an opportunity to visualize whatever it is we're learning about in our own space within our own time. right? It gives us those sort of off ramps of additional information. It's not the same information. It's new, it's different, and it gives us a more immersive and interactive way to kind of do that. When it comes to virtual reality, we've seen a huge uptick in uses for it, especially for safety training, right? You really can't go wrong training people how to put on their PPE, right? Whether it's their hard hat, the Visi vest, the goggles, whatever it might be, you can train that. You can also train everyone the safety. Like here's hazard awareness 101. Let's walk around the environment and identify anything that could potentially hurt you or other people, right? These types of things really resonate and they're relatively universal, right? They're evergreen in a lot of ways in that they just don't really change. Like we'll always have to worry about hazards. We'll always have to be safe when we're working at heights. We'll always have to be, there's some things that are just universal for those. And those types of trainings tend to really stick and they tend to be more popular. And we've seen a real uptick in those types of things. Where we've seen a little bit of growth is in like that custom building, but virtual reality tends to be more of an investment in time and resources than its augmented reality counterpart.
Would you say there's an opportunity for someone entering this field to start building those skills early in AR or even VR and start finding their niche early? Or is it something that you'd encourage people to start building skills after they have their foundation?
What's great about this, and that's a fantastic question, is that the skills they're learning at the foundational level all translate over to building this type of content, right? At some point, you're going to have to bring in someone else or learn a new skill to kind of finalize it. But whether you're doing, you're working with SMEs, you're doing needs analysis, you're building out storyboards, you're planning, you're doing all of these things that you're already doing for any learning modality that you decide to use, whether it's an e-learning, whether it's a video, right? All of these skills that they're learning all translate over. You're just thinking a little bit different, right? So instead of just building for the rectangle in front of us, then you start thinking, oh, well, what happens to the sides or behind me or above me? Maybe nothing, but what could happen there, right? So just thinking about it from a little bit different perspective really helps kind of kick these things off too. But yeah, all of those skills that they learn, the things that they learn how to do using some of the tools that are there too, working with timelines, working with variables, working with images or text or all of those types of skills, they all translate to those different editors that work for the AR content, especially, right? Those WYSIWYG editors. You're always going to have to click a button and upload images. You're always going to have to work with variables, if this, then this. I mean, that's essentially a mantra that we do when we're building learning, right? If the learner does this, then this happens or this happens. And that's exactly the same way we build out, that foundational level of content for augmented reality. When it comes to virtual reality, again, those skills for planning and putting those things in place all translate over. One of the things you'll see is that the price of doing business in VR is that it does require that developer aspect, right? Somebody who knows how to use that Unity game engine or that Unreal game engine. 3D modeling comes into play huge. And those are typically skills that some of the people going through your courses may not have or may not be able to cultivate, but they could certainly go down that direction. I always say it's kind of like, as an instructional designer, you're kind of like a musician, right? You don't have to play all the instruments to be able to write the music or understand what's happening right inside of there. Once you sort of learn the flow and your different sections, you understand, I don't have to play trumpet to understand that this is a treble line that's doing what it needs to do, right? I understand what's happening with it. And I find myself a lot of times in that situation where it's like, hey, I don't fully, I couldn't sit down and code everything out and do all these things, probably. But I understand what's going on enough so that when people start talking about it, I can be like, hey, you know what? This makes sense. But from an instructional standpoint, we need to make sure we do this. Let's make sure that we can keep everything together. And I think that's an important piece for your students, especially to understand, is that all the things the core things you're learning, the core principles and skills that they're putting together, it's going to give them the opportunity to learn and grow to all of the different modalities, right? AR and VR may not be the last thing we see. AI, right, is all big right now too. Like there's all kinds of stuff, and there may be more opportunities down the road for different technologies. And one thing that's great is that, again, those core skills, they lead us into and help us to use these technologies as effectively as possible for learning development. Like that's really the key here. It's not necessarily, gosh, can I code or can I build these things? It's, can I help my team create the best possible learning regardless of the modality that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I teach my students is to design like a superhero, right? And that what I mean by that is, what is the best way to design this instruction or deliver this training or learning or whatever you want to call it for this situation, whether you know how to use the tech or not. And so I love the idea of them even just being more familiar with the possibilities that are out there as far as what you can do. So if they wanted to go and start playing around with some AR, because that sounds like probably the easiest way to get started, what are some of these WYSIWYG tools, some of these like user interface things that are easy, no code type of AR applications? Where would you send them, Destery? What tools would you send them to?
So you can Google search for a lot of them. The tool that I use, that I use is Zappar, right? If you go to zap.works, you can find they have a hobbyist account. It's free. You get 5 codes to get started. Their tool is called ZapWorks Designer. You get up there and you log right in and you can just get started building, right? They have a lot of templates and things like that. They make it super easy to get into. And I've had a lot of great success with them. I've been using Zappar now for the better part of 10 years. And what's great about it is that longevity. They've been around. Like we've seen some tools come, we've seen some tools go. You know, it's hard to stick in this space a little bit, but that'd be my recommendation to get started. And obviously there's other tools out there too. If you have the Adobe suite, Adobe has an AR tool called Adobe Aero. That's a great one. So if your organization or you already have access to this, you could get into that for free. They have a lot of tutorials and different things you can do. But yeah, I think that those are a couple great places to start. And again, what's great is that they're cheap and easy to get started in, right? Especially when you're just building your skills and learning. I think I would encourage all of your students to have an AR piece to their portfolio, right?
I know. I was about to go.
Yeah.
I was about to go preach the gospel today after this, after meeting with you today. Destiny, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go get this tool. I'm going to go tell them that this is their next portfolio piece, because we're always going to have to continue increasing the types of skills and the technologies that they use in order to be marketable in our industry. And I think this is probably something that hasn't been on a lot of people's radars, but it's been around long enough. It's not going anywhere.
Exactly.
We've found so many uses for it, and we only continue to find more. And then the VR, there's also same kind of advice, I guess, right? There's like scenario VR. And are there any other ones that are real easy?
So Scenario VR works in 360 VR, right? 360 video. So that works really good. In fact, in tools like Captivate and Storyline, they have 360 image opportunities as well you can do. When it comes to full VR, whether it's like more that game sort of feel, that CGI VR, there are a few tools that are sort of making their way in. A company that I really like called Motive, they have a tool called Storyflow. Another company that's doing great things out there is Tailspin. They have a tool called Copilot, right? These are all, again, these are cloud-based codeless tools that some of your students may end up finding themselves using at some point in their career. But as of right now, again, the VR piece is a little bit more challenging because it does require that developer aspect of it, right? If we're going the full CGI VR, that game VR. But yeah, they can start working with 360 images now. If anybody has a 360 camera, you can start taking your own pictures and drop it into Storyline or Captivate, or get a free trial for Scenario VR. Like there's some opportunities out there. In fact, just at the last conference I was at, I saw a significant uptick in the amount of 360 video sort of VR content at the demo fest that was there. Like I hadn't seen quite so much. When this technology first started showing up in 2016, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then it never really went anywhere. So it's exciting to see that groups are kind of going back to it a little bit and seeing what else they can do with that 360 immersive content in there. And that's probably a little bit easier space to start when it comes to that virtual simulation too, because you can consume it in a headset or on a browser, on a mobile device. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So, but yeah, that would be especially the AR piece, right? Have an AR component to your portfolio and make sure that you put that in there in a way that sort of like enhances something else that you already have. Like how can you take your learner on a little bit different journey or a more in-depth journey into the topic that you're doing? So that's really where it makes the most sense.
Oh, neat. Like I know a lot of them go and they volunteer for nonprofits.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, they'll volunteer for the Humane Society and they'll build volunteer training on how to work with the animals and all those kinds of things. And if they went and they built an AR thing for like how to handle a dog or something or whatever, like just in time.
Yep. They could do something like that, learning the breeds, right? They could pop up and it could scan and like, here's the different breeds of the different, here's what they're best at. Here's what they do great. Here's where the challenges are faced, right? Like you could build like a whole little AR cheat sheet on the animals or the things that are there. So yeah, you could do a lot of really cool stuff. And again, it's that instant access to information, right? I scan something and I instantly have the info right here, ready to go. So.
All right. So what do you think is going to be? Do you think we're just going to keep developing use cases for AR, VR? Do you think there's going to be more of like a combination of things where we're like AI is added to AR and like that's where the next thing is? Or give us some futurist thoughts.
Sure. I'll put on my future thinking hat. It's tough to say because AI about this time last year, right, was all the rage, right? ChatGPT, like it hasn't been around that long, all of those things. And then every organization in the book was like, we're putting in AI, right? And although I question that immediacy, I totally understand where we kind of all jump to the new shiny thing. I think that a combination of all the things is really where the future lands, right? I think that I mentioned this before, that blended aspect. How can we there's no one thing that's going to be the best experience for the learners that we end up building for. So how do we use what we're using now? How do we incorporate all those things into a space where it all seamlessly works together? And I think that's where augmented reality to enhance, virtual reality to simulate, and AI to maybe automate some of those things, right? Like I see where, that enhance, that simulation, that automation, those are all going to kind of come together. And what's great too is that because there's such an interest in it, these tools are just going to become more accessible. They're going to become easier to use, and everybody's really leaning towards that no code, low code kind of aspect. So again, those skills that we all learn as instructional designers are going to translate over to these new things as well. It's just going to take a little time. So I'm curious to see what the next thing is, like maybe holograms, right? I don't know.
I think we already do some holograms. They were just like not that interested in them.
Well, they're complicated, right? It's expensive to do. What I think another thing we'll see here relatively soon too is some sort of a wearable technology piece, like glasses or something that doesn't make us look funny or feel self-conscious. Like as soon as somebody cracks the code on a device that everybody's like, I'll put that on my face, then the whole thing changes, right? Like everything changes because then you're hands free and you've got this thing that you've decided you're okay to put on your face, and it becomes like a fully mobile sort of kind of thing. So that'll be a whole nother sort of reinvention, if you will, of how we apply a lot of these immersive technologies once the hardware and the tools catch up.
And don't they call it like the Internet of Things, when
the IoT, right? Yeah. And it's sort of just a term that covers all the bases. The Internet of Things. Well, what's new? It's the Internet of Things, all of them.
I got an Internet of Things ring that tracks all my data and my
there you go.
how much I move. And it's interesting that you brought up the glasses, the wearable glasses. I was talking to somebody who works at Amazon today, and she's like, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm like, they let me try on their new wearable glasses product and it has Alexa built in.
There you go.
And so
yeah.
I think your finger's on the pulse. I think that's exactly what's coming out.
Yeah. And like I said, we're sort of we're kind of fickle creatures sometimes. Like, it's like, I don't want to look too weird. but I totally want the technology. So like I said, as soon as somebody cracks that code where the whole universally all of us go, okay, I'll do that. It's like the iPhone, right? The iPhone and the iPad, they really aren't that old either. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. So, but as soon as we, or even MP3 players, like as soon as we remember, we used to carry those little pills around. Like I'm dating myself here, but they had all these little pills that you plugged in and you did, like they all looked so weird. And then all of a sudden the iPod came out and everybody was like, oh yeah, we'll just make everything look like this. And then the iPhone came out and everybody's like, oh yeah, we'll just make everything look like this, right? Like everything looks the same because we've all decided that was that collective, we like this, build more of these, right? And that same thing's going to happen with immersive technology and hardware and things like that. Oh, I like this. I'll put this on my face. Never build anything but this again. And that's really what'll happen. And then that'll sort of ensure that mass adoption. And then we're going to see once that happens, once that sort of aspect hits us, you're going to see an indefinite growth in, hey, we need to know what to do with this for learning, right? And I think that's also a great thing that I try to tell people is like, hey, get started now because you don't want to be behind the eight ball when you reach that point when you're with an organization and they say, hey, my kid just got these glasses. What can we do with them in learning? And you're like, I don't even know what the glasses are, right? That's not that you want to be like, hey, that's great. We've actually been talking a lot about this. Let's see where we can incorporate what we're doing now from handheld into that hardware, into that wearable space. So all of us should keep our finger on the pulse at least a little bit when it comes to those types of things, especially in this industry, because it changes, things stay the same, but also there's opportunities that hit us really quick and we got to be able to kind of pivot and move with those.
Where do you find your best stay in the know with new tech?
Oh gosh, if I go to Google search and then I filter it by technology, right? And then they have another filter where you can put in like virtual reality. And if you click on that virtual reality piece there, it shows you all the latest AR and VR. Like they don't discriminate. They just put all the stuff in there. They're like virtual reality, but it's really everything, right? So I stay up to date there. There's a newsletter, the TLDR newsletter, right? The Too Long Don't Read newsletter that's out there that you can do. But yeah, a lot of times I'll just Google, I'll filter it out and say, what's happened in the last month? Yeah. Augmented reality, right? And then I get some obscure articles. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I try to stay connected to all the people that I can. I connect to as many people on LinkedIn as I can, and they share a lot of, like, I find people that are in sort of that same space and either follow their organization or follow them. And then they post stuff. And then, a couple times a week, I go in and clear out the hundreds of notifications that I got. And I try to find the ones that look like, that are like, oh, hey, look what we did and stuff like that. I find a lot of my information on Reddit too. Like I'm part of like the Unity forums. I'm part of the augmented reality forums, the Quest forums. Like I follow all of the different brand names of these hardware and software companies. And that's where I get a lot of my information too. We just get so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hose every day. So you got to kind of find a handful that really work for you and kind of do that. But yeah, I just search and try to stay connected to as many people who are smarter than me as possible, and then I can learn from them.
That's an easy strategy. All right. So my final question, Destery, is what is your best and final advice for those who are looking to become an idol right now and enter this space?
I think the biggest thing is to learn about all the stuff, right? Build those core competencies in the foundation of being able to, plan out learning. And then don't get too lost in the weeds when it comes to the tools that you're going to use to build it, right? Build that core learning, great objectives, do a solid needs analysis, understand working with the SMEs so that you can translate all of that stuff into something that's actionable from a learning perspective. And then the other stuff will come. Like the tools are all going to come and go. They're all going to kind of work a little bit the same, right? I wouldn't fret too much about those. You'll need to know them, but don't fret too much about that. Where the real magic happens, though, is at the beginning. Like, how do I take this concept that people want me to teach all these other people? How do we build that solid foundation? And, technology or not, that is the core piece of being able to build a solid learning or training program that's going to last the test of time. People will be like, oh yeah, I watched a video, but if the video is great, if the video is solid, if it has a lot of valuable information, that's going to mean a lot more than the video by itself ever could, right? Doesn't matter how flashy we make it. Doesn't matter how exciting it is, right? Doesn't matter how many simulations we build. If they're not great, if they're not instructionally sound, we're just doing a disservice. And then we're just using technology for the sake of technology. And that's a whole nother podcast. So
yeah, no, this is great advice. I mean, even from the XR architect himself saying, like, put the time in to learn the foundational skills to build instructionally aligned content. And I think it means even more hearing it from you, who is a technology enthusiast. So
yep, that's the strategy for long-term success, right? Do the work now, build those foundational skills, and then you can adapt to whatever technology comes along, because technology won't stop growing. It won't stop changing. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Destery. You have been an absolutely wonderful guest. I just have learned so much from you. So thank you so much for coming on the Become an Idol podcast.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode at idlecourses.com. If you like this podcast and you want to become an instructional designer and online learning developer, join me in the Idle Courses Academy, where you'll learn to build all the assets you need to land your first instructional design job, early access to this podcast, tutorials for how to use the e-learning authoring tools, templates for everything course building, and paid instructional design experience opportunities. Go to idlecourses.com/academy and enroll or get on the wait list. Now get out there and build transcendent courses.